So we should probably all know by now, well, at least all the people who watched this show, but for those who did, we should all know by now that the HBO hit show Euphoria is returning in April of this year with a third season. Finally. The amount of time they had in between this now new season and season 2 gave me more than enough time to forget almost everything that happened, along with all the changes in the cast. So I thought it would be the perfect time to just rewatch the second season altogether, and I have some thoughts and observations to share from my point of view, of course. So you are welcome to, of course, feel differently and share your thoughts in the comments. But let's get into it, shall we? Now I'm gonna have to work my way up to Rue, our main character, because she always has a hell of a lot going on. So let's start with Maddie and Nate. So they were broken up by the time as season 2 started, but their relationship was just a wreck. And I can't say that either of the two parties involved are better than the other, or that they're a good partner to even be with. They both bring issues to the table. It's just that one of them in particular might have some more traumatizing baggage. So let's talk about the one with way less traumatizing baggage first. Maddie. Now, in her childhood, she would compete in numerous pageants, going on to become pretty successful at it, due in part to her confidence, until her mom saw something on the news about her pageant coach getting arrested, so she takes her out of the pageants. So Maddie would fight it at first in protest, but then she would eventually accept it, but lose her drive and desire to pursue any specific path in life. She just saw the rich women at her mom's job that did very little to nothing and decided she wanted to be just like them, which could ultimately be a factor as to why she would cling to her tumultuous relationship to Nate, because she just ultimately wanted to be a kept woman, and Nate came from a pretty wealthy family. However, in season 1, they would be pretty hot and cold, on and off again, and it was really all over the place. But during these breaks, Maddie would sleep with other people, and it really just seemed like Nate was in a completely different universe, dealing with his family issues, mainly relating to his dad. Now, his dad, Cal, is pretty hard on him, but you can tell that's due in part to how he himself grew up. But it does seem possible that it plays a part in Nate himself being unhinged and volatile, and also prone to violence to get what he wants. Now, his dad is also into some pretty kinky stuff outside of his wife, and he unfortunately likes to record his exploits, which Nate eventually finds when he was still fairly young. So this also contributes to his struggles with his own sexuality. It messed him up, to put it lightly. But we find out that Cal kind of does this stuff because back when he was a teenager, it was pretty clear that he was interested in men, or more specifically his best friend Derek. But because of his dad, Bud, being pretty hard on him too, he felt like there was just no room for him to be his true self. So when he finally got a girlfriend, Marcia, his parents are excited, especially his dad, because I think he had picked up on the little vibe going on between him and Derek, which he didn't like. However, even though Cal was still hoping to eventually run off into the sunset with Derek, Marcia gets pregnant with their first son, Aaron. And it kind of squashes all of the hopes and dreams of happiness, because it seemed like he was really only with Marcia to please his dad, and now he's basically stuck with her. But I think over the years, Marcia eventually connected the dots and knew something was going on with Cal, but she still stayed in the marriage. However, Cal eventually crashes out after living a lie for so many years and tells his sons Aaron and Nate about him sleeping with men, and he really could care less about any of their feelings, including Marcia's, before storming out the house with a family photo in his hand. But I think Aaron is probably the only one in the situation that was confused, because Nate definitely knew all about this, and I think Marcia had some type of an inkling. But back in season 1, Maddie, while over at Nate's house, steals the disc of Cal sleeping with Jules, who, as we know, is transgender, but is also very much so underage. So Cal could ultimately get into some serious trouble. So Nate is freaking out about Maddie having that disc, but before we get to that part, let's talk about Cassie. So Cassie is, of course, Maddie's best friend, so she knows about Nate to an extent, not entirely when it comes to all the craziness going on in the background, but she knows a little bit about him. But Cassie is definitely the complete opposite of Maddie, in that she's very much so not confident in herself. She's very insecure and kind of just lets people run all over her, which is why she ends up being a prime target for Nate at the beginning of season 2. After his breakup from Maddie and on his way to this New Year's party, he sees Cassie in a parking lot and offers her a ride and a few beers. They end up sort of hooking up in the bathroom at the party, and ironically enough, Maddie knocks on the door, needing to use it while they're in there, and she hears Nate's voice. So they come up with a plan for Nate to leave the bathroom and Cassie to stay in the bathtub until after Maddie leaves. But that takes a while, and her phone ends up ringing because her sister Lexi has been trying to find her after she just erratically got out the car on the way to the party. Cassie and Nate manage to get out that situation, but not entirely unscathed, because Nate starts being weird towards Cassie's ex, Chris, aka his friend. Yeah, hella messy, I know. But as you can see, Cassie and Nate might deserve each other. So shortly after this, Fez notices Nate and decides to get some punches in for Nate calling the police in season 1, tipping them off to raid Fez's house, and then also because he was making threats against Rue and Jules. And he pretty much sees them as his family now. So while in the hospital, Nate is in there daydreaming about having a life and family with Cassie, but he desperately wants to get rid of or just remove his dad from the picture because he's kind of an idiot, on top of the double life he was living. Then Cassie and Nate go on to sneak around behind Maddie's back for quite some time without her knowing. And in the end, she only really comes to know about it after Rue just straight up tells her that she saw Cassie getting into Nate's car a couple times and it looked really weird. But with Cassie, you can tell it was eating away at her before Maddie found out, but at the same time, she just kept sneaking around, letting Nate fill her head with nonsense about her having power over him, pretty much for him to string her along low-key. But it doesn't take too long for things to eventually get toxic between them, so there's a whole lot of crying and apologizing going on throughout the season, but I don't think Cassie is actually sorry for anything. In fact, I think she values this thing that she has with Nate over her friendship with Maddie, but doesn't want to admit it to herself. And Nate keeps trying to draw that out of her, but she keeps talking about how she feels so bad for betraying Maddie while standing in Nate's bedroom in his clothes. Like, be so for real. But Nate does eventually fully end things, I think, because I don't think there's any way to come back from this. But he kind of ends things for real this time with Maddie on a much crazier note. So he goes to Maddie's house and he threatens to take himself out in front of her if she doesn't hand over the disc of his dad and Jules. But of course, she doesn't know that that's what's on the disc at the time because she never watched it. So yeah, their relationship was toxic, but it had never gotten this far before. So he left her basically traumatized, but wanted to act like it was just a prank or something, not that serious afterwards, which again just verifies how much mental help this man actually needs. Now let's move on to Lexi. Now Lexi used to be Rue's friend before Rue's father had passed away, and of course her very problematic hardcore drug use. So this, paired with Lexi's own struggles, kind of put a wedge between them. But eventually Rue would meet Jules, who she would go on to have a romantic relationship with, but would pretty much be high for the majority of during the second season, and not really remember much about it. But back to Lexi though. So she has a pretty interesting relationship with her sister Cassie, because she's always the one to check on Cassie's well-being, especially when she started acting kind of uncontrollably emotional while dealing with Nate. But Cassie rarely ever takes the time to ask Lexi how she's doing. Yeah, they both had to deal with their dad disappearing, but somehow instead of being each other's solace, they just kind of drifted further apart. So when Lexi ends up meeting Fez at the New Year's party, they really hit it off because it was the first time that someone seemed genuinely interested in her and also wanted to know how she was doing and what she thought about certain things, which definitely caught her off guard, but it gave her the push that she needed to pursue her dreams, so to speak. So she eventually starts working on this play pretty much based around her life. And it ends up being so true to her life that some folks like Nate and Cassie weren't really big fans of it. But honestly, I think deep down that Cassie is just a really selfish person, even if she doesn't want to admit it to herself. However, during this somewhat train wreck of a play, Lexi is still holding out hope that Fez would show up, and he was on his way, but the guy he was trusting to keep his mouth shut about what Ash did was now working with the police, and it ends up just being a madhouse because Ash refused to let Fez go down for his mistakes, and he's taken down down right in front of him. But back at school, Lexi and everyone else don't know that yet. So she's just disappointed about Fez not showing up, not knowing the real reason why. But Lexi is definitely a giver, which is why she kind of gets used up and trampled over a lot, whereas the others are mainly just kind of self-obsessed. Leading us, of course, to Rue and all the people in her close and drug-filled circle. So Rue clearly has a drug problem, which is kind of the basis of the show, along with a few other things, of course, but this is really one of the main storylines and why the show was probably named Euphoria in the first place, because Rue is constantly on the pursuit of a euphoric feeling. She's always looking for her next fix or hit so that she doesn't have to feel all the emotions that come with losing her dad. Definitely a form of escapism. In the first season, she was barely holding on to sobriety near the end, but after Jules leaves her behind for a while, she goes right back to her old ways at the New Year's Eve party, where she meets Elliot, another teenager with addiction issues, but it's nowhere near the level that Rue's on. Shortly after this unfortunate meeting, she runs into Jules, who thinks she's still sober, but she had literally just sniffed something with Elliot just a moment before this reunion. But even though she's not in a good spot, she and Jules still try to have a crack at a relationship, but after she goes out with Fez on a business meetup with a dealer, Rue eventually makes a deal with her herself. She gets the inventory even though she knows good and well she's probably just gonna use all of it, not making a dime to pay this dealer back. But the dealer does help Rue when she comes back at some point after going on a rampage because Jules told her mom that she was back to her usual antics. But the scene in itself when she was just losing her mind was just so interesting, because her mom had flushed the inventory down the toilet, but it was a whole suitcase full of pills. And you're trying to tell me that the question didn't cross your mind of who this might have come from before flushing it down the toilet? Yeah, I think it's clear her mom isn't the brightest bulb, but regardless, Rue wasn't going to sell anything anyway. But they do try to take her back to the hospital. She escapes before that can happen, but goes over to Cassie and Lexi's house and outs Cassie to Maddie about the whole Nate situation. But after Rue gets morphine from the dealer, Lori, and now after dealing with those withdrawals, she decides to get clean, apologizes to everyone around her for all the crazy things she said and did. But there's a lingering question going into the new season. Is she going to stay clean? Obviously, everyone in her life wants her to, but the question is, does she want to? Because she really has to be the one to want it as well. She has to want it bad enough for herself to make it happen. And she can't keep using her dad's death as the reason. Her sister and mom are also going through that same loss as well. She's not the only one dealing with that pain. But this next season, I have a feeling is going to kind of be like the moment of reckoning for Rue for all the crazy things she chose to do, even if she chooses to stay clean and on the straight and narrow path this time. So we'll just ultimately have to wait and see where this goes. But obviously we know that there are going to be a few cast members missing for different reasons. But I am curious to see who is going to be coming back and also who is going to really make this storyline interesting. But you guys let me know your thoughts down in the comments about this season, season 2. Before we hop into season 3, I just want to do like a quick overview, a recap, and give some thoughts just before we start talking about the new episodes when those come out in April. But let me know your thoughts. I'll catch you on the next one.